Long, long ago, in a country quite close to the top of the earth, where the north wind blew fiercely each spring, there lived a woman called Dame Grumble. Now, Dame Grumble had an apple tree, which she loved exceedingly, although it vexed her beyond all compare. It was a very fine, large tree, and well shaped for shade, just the sort of tree that should have yielded a bushel or two of fruit each autumn. But it did not. Each year, when the cuckoo flew over the earth, calling the trees and flowers to waken because spring was come again, the apple tree would be covered with clouds upon clouds of fragrant pinky white blossoms. Then Dame Grumble's heart would rejoice. But no sooner was the apple tree thus bedecked than the north wind would blow furiously, tearing off the blossoms and carrying them off in clouds. The curious part of it all was this: when a few of the blossoms chanced to fall to the ground, they made a chinking sound like that of small coins in children's banks. Then when these blossoms had withered, Dame Grumble would find nice new shining pennies where they had lain. From this she supposed the apple tree would one day bear apples of gold. Now, Dame Grumble, it must be confessed, was not very amiable. Indeed, it was from her nature that she drew her name. Some said Dame Grumble complained from the time she rose in the morning until she sought her bed at night. Even then she complained of her hard pillow or thin coverlets until she fell asleep. Her poor son, Freyo, thought his mother must surely grumble all night in her dreams, for on waking each day she began directly where she had left off the night before. Many a time this poor lad wished that he were not lame, but could go out in the world to seek his way for himself. Dame Grumble led him a dreadful life. If the day were hot, Dame Grumble thought longingly of the days when the snow lay on the ground, and she sat in comfort before the blazing logs. But when the winter came again, she complained bitterly because she had to break the ice on the well each morning. She declared it was a shame, since she had but one son, that he should be lame, and thus be a burden instead of a staff. Her ceaseless scolding and carping often made poor Freyo so miserable that he would put aside his wood carving, for he had no heart to work. If the east wind blew ever so lightly, Dame Grumble complained that it gave her strange pains in her face, and would wish instead for the west wind, which she thought mild and gentle. But when the west wind blew over the forest and fields, and dried the linen she spread on the hedges, Dame Grumble cried out that he was a thieving creature. She would hasten to gather her dried linens, vowing all the while that the west wind would steal them if he dared. Oh, there was no pleasing Dame Grumble. Freyo, her son, was well aware of that. Now, seeing that Dame Grumble was of a disposition to grumble and complain when there was no cause at all, you may have some idea of her bitter feeling when the north wind robbed her of her apple blossoms each spring.
"Oh, you wicked creature!"
Dame Grumble would exclaim when he began to shake the apple tree.
"Just wait, and some day I'll catch you and shut you up in some dark place where you shall remain forever. No one would miss you. The north wind is the most hated wind that blows."
"Indeed, Dame Grumble," the north wind would reply. "How would the boys and girls ever skate if I did not blow in winter time? How would the forests and orchards ever have time to make their new green leaves and flowers for the springtime if I did not lock the earth tight each winter? You make a mistake, madam. The north wind would be keenly mourned and missed. But beware, some day I will catch you and carry you off to a certain desert island in the middle of the sea, and there you may complain for all your days." Then the North Wind would roar and blow his hardest, and Dame Grumble's petticoats would spread out like sails until she feared she might be blown away, and would seek refuge in the cottage. There, in anger, she would watch the clouds of blossoms blown from her favourite tree. When the North Wind had gone off again, she would rush out and scold the apple tree severely.
"Oh, such a tree!"
Dame Grumble would exclaim in vexation.
"If you would but cling more firmly to your blossoms, at least a few would remain on your branches, and then I should have a golden harvest. From the pennies I find where your blossoms have withered, I'm quite sure that you would bear apples of gold, if you bore apples at all. Then I could sell these golden apples and make a fortune for myself."
"But, Dame Grumble," the apple tree would protest, "you cannot withstand the North Wind either. Your petticoats spread out like sails, and you can scarcely keep your feet on the ground."
"And what of that?"
Dame Grumble would answer crossly.
"I have but 2 feet, while you have roots as numerous as your branches. Moreover, they reach far down beneath the earth, and there spread far and wide as your topmost boughs. You are stronger than I. You should fight the North Wind, who is naught but a wicked robber in disguise. I am sure that he has stored up a fortune in pennies from my blossoms that he has stolen this many a long year."
Then Dame Grumble would shake the apple tree until Freyo would beg her to stop. It must not be supposed that Dame Grumble did not contrive various ways to save her blossoms from her enemy. Indeed, she spent many hours every day thinking of plans to defeat the North Wind, but she had never succeeded. All one winter she worked in the cold and snow, chopping tall thorn branches to make a barrier about the apple tree.
"Thorn branches are very strong and will protect the apple tree,"
thought she. Freyo told his mother this was useless work, but she would pay no heed to what he said.
"Then, mother,"
pleaded the poor lad,
"since you will not stay indoors this bitter weather, please bring me a branch of walnut from the forest. I would like to carve a clock case in a certain design I have in mind. If I had but proper tools for wood carving and a store of oak and walnut, I might one day make a fortune for you. Then you would have no longer need to quarrel with the North Wind about the blossoms."
"Oh, hold your silly tongue,"
cried Dame Grumble.
"A great simpleton I would be to sit here quietly and wait for you to make a fortune with your bits of woods. Each year the North Wind steals a fortune in pennies from me, and I mean to try to stop him if I can. Should I find a bit of walnut that will fit into my pocket, you may have it. Otherwise you must do without."
Poor Freyo had but few tools, and those few were very poor. Nevertheless, he had skilful fingers, and could carve lovely pictures in wood. Dame Grumble always laughed scornfully when the lad spoke of the fortune he hoped one day to make. To her mind, wood carving and clumsy chests and clock cases were naught but folly. She rarely remembered to bring Freyo a branch of wood from the forest. Dame Grumble was always thinking of her blossoms and her enemy the North Wind, and had no time to think of Freyo. So the poor lad had to content himself with bits of wood he found in the chimney corner, and he carved frames and treasure boxes from these. Now, as we have told, all one winter Dame Grumble worked diligently dragging thorn branches from the forest until she had a great heap. When the snow began to melt, she planted these branches of thorn about her favourite tree. Then, when the apple tree was decked once more in clouds upon clouds of fragrant pinky white blossoms, the North Wind came roaring over the fields and lanes. He laughed loudly when he saw the barrier of thorn branches.
"And so, Dame Grumble,"
cried the North Wind,
"you do not know my strength better than this."
Seizing a branch of the thorn, he tore it from the ground as though it had been a twig, and hurled it in the air. Then he did likewise to the rest, and in half an hour he had torn up every vestige of Dame Grumble's barrier.
"Many times I have left you a few blossoms, Dame Grumble,"
he cried as he blew on his way,
"but you have never thanked me for the pennies, so this time you shall have none."
Naturally, Dame Grumble was more vexed than ever before. She shook the apple tree with fury, and left off only when she was too weary to shake it longer. All evening she scolded so bitterly that Freyo wished himself far away. Life with this scolding dame was far from pleasant for the poor lame lad. Still, he never complained.
Mother complains enough for both,
thought he. When Dame Grumble arose next morning, she had another plan in mind.
"My son,"
said she,
"I am going on a journey to seek in all places for the fortune in pennies which my wicked enemy, the North Wind, has stolen from me. When I have found it, I shall return, and all things will be well. I shall buy you a fine coach, and build a noble house where we shall live like kings and queens, and there we shall be very happy, I dare say."
"But, mother,"
cried Freyo in dismay,
"the North Wind travels all over the earth, and that you cannot do. When winter comes, what will you do for shelter? Besides, I do not long for a coach, but for a crutch instead. And as for happiness, it is to be found in kind hearts rather than in noble houses. In our little cottage we could be as happy as kings and queens, if you would but leave off scolding and be content."
"That shows how little you know,"
replied Dame Grumble.
"I cannot be content without a fortune, and a fortune I mean to have. If I have not found the hollow that I seek before winter comes again, I shall return. But I have a feeling that my search will not be all in vain."
Then, bidding Freyo take good care of the cottage, Dame Grumble tied on her bonnet and shawl, and set out on her journey. When Dame Grumble had gone, Freyo was greatly puzzled. He was not sure that he was really lonely. He missed his mother's presence about the cottage, because she was a famous housewife, always busy with some savoury broth or baking great loaves of brown bread. However, he was relieved that he did not hear her sharp tongue scolding all day long. He carefully tidied the kitchen until it looked spotless and shining, as though Dame Grumble herself had done it. Then he sat down before his bench. While he was working, Freyo paused. He thought he heard his name called softly.
"Freyo, Freyo,"
spoke a gentle voice.
"Only come to the door, and you can see me. I have something to tell you that will make you happy. Please, do come."
Freyo set down his work and hobbled to the door.
"It is I, the apple tree,"
spoke the voice again.
"Come nearer, that I may talk to you. You have always been kind to me when Dame Grumble has abused me, Freyo, and now I shall reward you."
Freyo made his way to the apple tree, and she continued,
"Do you see my 2 stoutest branches, quite close to the ground? These I mean to give to you for crutches." "Oh, apple tree!"
cried Freyo.
"I would not cut off your branches. I would not give you such pain. But cutting off these 2 branches of mine will cause me no great pain,"
the apple tree insisted.
"They are over heavy, and next spring, when the north wind blows, I fear that he will snap them off. What the north wind cannot bend, he will break, as well you know. When you have made your crutches, you may go to the forest and gather more wood for your work of wood carving, until you have the store that you desire."
At last Freyo was persuaded. The branches were cut, and all day long he sat beneath the apple tree while he fashioned a pair of crutches. By evening they were finished, and when he slept that night, Freyo dreamed of wandering in the greenwood. He had never yet been so far from the cottage door.
"How well you have done!"
exclaimed the apple tree next morning, when Freyo stepped out briskly on his crutches.
"And you too have done well,"
replied the lad.
"I see 2 tufts of green leaves, already at work to cover the places where I cut your branches."
He waved farewell to the apple tree, and set upon his way. Freyo was gone the whole day long. When the sun set that evening, he had not returned, and even when the moon rose slowly, still he did not come. The apple tree began to worry and to fret, lest her branches had not proved strong enough for crutches. Then presently she saw Freyo with a heavy pannier strapped upon his back, but not one bit of oak or walnut wood had he.
"Ah, apple tree!" cried he. "Never in my life have I been happy as I was today. Only to wander beneath the trees and see the blue forget-me-nots that make a lovely carpet underfoot, or to hear the birds sing sweetly, was like paradise. I wished the whole world were one great forest, and that the time were always spring. I could not bear to come away." "But Freyo," said the apple tree, "you have brought nothing for your work. How will you make chests and clock cases?" "I could not find it in my heart to cut the smallest twig," confessed the lad. "The trees looked all so beautiful and stately that it seemed to me a shame. Instead, I gathered brown bells and forget-me-nots to plant about your roots. I'm sure you must be lonely in this bare, wind-swept spot, and they will serve for company." "Now that was kind," replied the apple tree. "But you must now give heed to what I say. In the forest there are many trees that will gladly give you a fine branch or two. When next you go there, tell them that you are the friend of the apple tree, whose blossoms fall to earth with a chinking sound like small coins in children's banks. Then they will know you and will be generous, as I have been. Besides, I warn you that at the first approach of winter Dame Grumble will return. She will be crosser than ever, for she will never find the fortune in pennies that she seeks. Now be advised, Freyo, and gather a goodly store of oak and walnut while you may."
When Freyo went again to the forest, he told the message of the apple tree to the tall pines and low bending oaks, and to shady maples too. These trees all gave him such a bounteous supply of boughs and branches that Freyo soon had store to last him for his carving a whole year or more. 'Twas well he had. One day, as he sat working beneath the apple tree, he noticed that the leaves fell fast and that the wind blew chill. Another morning, when the maples on the hillsides flamed like fire, Freyo heard a shrill, familiar voice borne on the air, and presently Dame Grumble herself appeared before the cottage door. Now, as the apple tree had foretold, Dame Grumble was crosser than ever. She had not found the fortune in pennies she had sought, and she was out of humour with her journey. She vowed that she had not had one pleasant moment from the time she had set out. She said that she had longed unceasingly for her little cottage. Dame Grumble solemnly declared that she had done with journeys for evermore, and looked forward to great happiness now that she was home at last. She praised Freyo's housekeeping, and said the cottage looked as tidy as a pin. When she had laid aside her bonnet and shawl, she began to make a fine supper for him.
"How nice that you have crutches, my son, and can get about so well,"
she cried with pleasure.
"Are they not a blessing, mother?"
asked Freyo.
"They are not bad for a poor lad who never before had seen a crutch, but made them just as best he knew."
Dame Grumble continued to praise the crutches and to admire them, until she learned that they were made from branches of the apple tree. Then she was furious. Her anger knew no bounds. She rushed out to the apple tree and shook it with all her might. Then she ran in to throw the crutches in the fire, but this Freyo would not permit.
"The apple tree herself gave me her branches, mother," said he, "and the crutches are mine."
"Give them to me at once, I say,"
stormed Dame Grumble.
"The apple tree is mine, and consequently her branches are mine also. I must punish you for this disobedience. Do you not know that I prize the apple tree above all else on earth? Do I not expect a harvest of golden apples from it some day? Now, when that day is come, I shall not have nearly so many, because of your wickedness. Why did you cut as much as a twig from the apple tree?"
"The apple tree herself gave me her branches, mother," answered Freyo, "and the crutches are mine."
Dame Grumble first commanded and then entreated that her son give her the crutches to burn, but Freyo was firm. At last she burst into tears.
"Oh, oh!"
she sobbed.
"Is it not enough that I have many troubles and cares in the past? Each year my wicked enemy, the North Wind, steals a fortune in pennies from me, and now added to this I must suffer disobedience from my own ungrateful son."
She sobbed and wailed until Freyo was nearly distracted.
"Oh, mother,"
he begged,
"if you would only cease your weeping and look at these wonderful things I have made in your absence. Here is a clock case with the 4 seasons carved upon it. The hours are told by 12 lovely nymphs dancing through the forest. It is a treasure worthy of a king. Some day a duke may come a-riding by and fancy it. Then, who knows, my fortune may be made, and I would give it all to you, mother."
In spite of all his pleadings, however, Dame Grumble would not look at his treasures. She was so deep in her woes that she could think of nothing else. She would not touch a crumb of supper, but said mournfully that she had no heart for either food or drink. Freyo sat before the fire, sad and desolate. With the scolding dame's return, the quiet and contentment of the little cottage had fled.
"Ah,"
sighed the poor lad.
"I have no doubt that mother is right. Perhaps I am wicked and ungrateful after all."
During the winter that followed, Dame Grumble led her son a dreadful life. He could no longer talk to his good friend the apple tree, for she was sleeping her deep winter's sleep, and would not waken until the spring. So, while the snow whirled high without, and piled itself in drifts at door and chimney, Freyo sat patiently carving his great oaken chests and settles. When he carved fields of wheat with wild fowl flying over, the poor lad fancied himself afield once more. When he carved forest scenes, he lived again the memories of his happy summer. If Dame Grumble spoke to her son, it was but to call him wicked and ungrateful. She often vowed she would forgive him if he would but give her the crutches to burn. But Freyo had a plan in mind. With the first sign of spring he meant to be off and seek his own way in the world, and this he could never do without his precious crutches. The poor lad had no desire to spend another winter with this cross, fault-finding dame. Now, as was her usual fashion, Dame Grumble spent much time in planning means to spare the blossoms of the apple tree. It happened that on her journey she had found a book which told of orchard trees and how to care for them. So in this book Dame Grumble now began to study diligently. She found a picture of an apple tree encased with strong, coarse netting. This strong, coarse netting, so the book said, would protect the fruit and blossoms from all harm. Accordingly, Dame Grumble sat her down before her wheel and spun endless miles of heavy thread. From this she next wove yards upon yards of strong, coarse netting. Often and often Freyo begged his mother to cease this useless labour. The North Wind would soon tear the whole thing into shreds, said he. You may be sure Dame Grumble always had a sharp retort for him.
"Had I a son who was a comfort and a blessing, I have no doubt that he would long ago have found a way to save my precious blossoms from the North Wind," she would say. "I dare say, too, that I would have had a harvest of golden apples long since. Even now I might be dwelling in some noble mansion, with slaves to do my bidding, and a different carriage for every day in the week."
So the winter dragged on wearily. At last the snow began to melt and the sunbeams to make bright spots on the kitchen floor. The hedges here and there showed patches of green leaves. The birds returned from the southland, whither they had gone for the winter. Forget-me-nots and brown bells blossomed about the apple tree, and the green grass for miles about was thick with yellow buttercups. It was then the apple tree awoke from her winter's sleep, and decked herself in clouds of fragrant pinky white blossoms. Then it was that Dame Grumble went forth from her cottage with yards upon yards of strong, coarse netting, with which she covered her favourite tree. Seeing the bare places that marked the 2 missing branches, she cried out afresh that she was a sad, sorrowful woman and had too many cares. While Dame Grumble was thus occupied, Freyo unlocked the cupboard where he had hidden his precious crutches. But, alas, the wood of the apple tree was not suitable for such use, and the crutches fell to pieces when he touched them. Freyo tried to mend them here and join them there, but it was in vain. They broke again in other places. Now, when Dame Grumble learned this, she vowed it was a just punishment for Freyo's disobedience. However, with her usual perverseness, she took no more interest in the crutches. She did not trouble to burn them, and there they lay in the cupboard for many a long day.
"You will obey your mother when she commands another time, I dare say,"
she would often remark, and point to the useless, broken things. Now that spring was come, it was not long before Dame Grumble's old enemy, the North Wind, came also. Shouting and hallooing, he blew over the fields and forests one sunshiny day, and when he reached the apple tree he stopped still in amazement.
Ho, 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 laughed the North Wind. Who has thus cleverly covered the apple tree?
"I have,"
shouted Dame Grumble from within her cottage, where she had run to hide.
"Now you had best be off, for you can never undo this strong, coarse netting I have woven. It is tied in 1,000 tight knots."
Ah, is it indeed, Dame Grumble?
Inquired the North Wind with mock politeness.
Will you kindly have patience for a little, until I try my skill?
With that he blew a blast that unloosed all the yards upon yards of strong, coarse netting, and bore them off like puffs of thistledown. Dame Grumble's heart sank. But, strange to say, the North Wind did not blow away the blossoms of the apple tree. Instead, he lingered about the cottage until night fell, and played all manner of tricks to bring Dame Grumble running out. He blew soot down the chimney, and blackened the clean-scrubbed kitchen floor. He put out her candle when she had lighted it for evening, and whisked her linen from the hedges into the fields and far away. Not one word of anger or reproach would Dame Grumble utter even so. If the North Wind would but spare the blossoms of the apple tree, nothing else mattered. At last the North Wind grew weary of his teasing and departed.
Just you wait, Dame Grumble, he called in farewell. Some day I shall catch you unaware, and I will carry you off to that desert island that waits to welcome you as Queen of Grumblers.
Then he blew on his way. Dame Grumble waited, fearful lest perhaps he would return, but the North Wind returned no more that spring. The blossoms on the apple tree began to wither, and presently tiny fruit began to form on its branches. It seemed at last as though Dame Grumble would gather the harvest of golden apples for which she had so longed. But even so, this cross, fault-finding dame was not content.
"Alack," she often mourned, "if I had had this strong, coarse netting years ago, I would have had many a golden harvest long ere this. Without doubt this covering hath a charm above the power of the North Wind. Had I a son to assist me, I dare say he would have thought about it long since."
"But, mother, I cannot help it that I am lame and do not assist you," sighed Freyo.
"But you can help it when you are wicked and disobedient. And wicked and disobedient you were when you cut the 2 stout branches of the apple tree. For now, though I shall gather golden apples, there will not be nearly so many because of your rash act."
So the springtime passed, and the summertime came. Day by day the fruit on the apple tree grew larger, and day by day Dame Grumble took pencil and paper to count the number of apples that hung upon each branch. She tried each day to reckon just how many more she would have had but for the branches Freyo had cut off, and every day she grew vexed afresh. Dame Grumble would not permit Freyo to go near the apple tree. She vowed he might take a notion to cut down the whole tree for all she knew. The summer grew older, the meadows turned brown, and the fields grew bare. Dame Grumble watched eagerly for a sign which should show that the apples were turning to gold, but no sign she saw. The apples turned bright red instead. The summer began to wane, and a sharp chill in the air warned Dame Grumble that winter was not far away. The maples on the hillsides flamed crimson and scarlet once again, and yellow leaves fell from the poplar trees like rain.
"Now can it be that you are going to disappoint me?"
exclaimed Dame Grumble to the apple tree.
"Why, pray, do not your apples turn to gold?"
"How you talk, Dame Grumble," replied the apple tree. "You will be disappointed no matter what happens. Though I gave you 1,000 gold apples, you would never cease to mourn that you might have had 100 more, had not Freyo cut off my 2 branches. Then you would make the poor lad's life more miserable than ever. I sometimes wonder that you are not ashamed to plague and torment him as you do. You do not deserve golden apples, and I will not give you golden apples. So you had best make haste and gather these red apples of mine before the frost will nip them."
But this Dame Grumble would not do. She was assured that the red apples would turn to gold, in spite of the apple tree. For if young and tender blossoms yielded bright new shining pennies, did it not follow that the ripened fruit must be of purest gold? Dame Grumble so believed.
"The apple tree does not love me, and never did,"
she thought within herself.
"It is but a plan to make me angry."
By and by the leaves fell from the apple tree itself, until its branches were quite bare and brown. The apples shone tantalizingly red, and then Dame Grumble realized at last that they would never change to golden, as she hoped. Now, this new disappointment, you may be sure, did not tend to sweeten her disposition. All day she sat gazing mournfully at her favourite tree, and wept bitter tears at her new loss.
"Oh, mother, pray do not weep so," begged Freyo. "You will make yourself ill. My store of wood is gone, but if you would bring me 2 stout branches from the forest, I would fashion another pair of crutches for myself. Then I would set out to make a fortune, to take the place of this fortune you fancy you have lost."
"Fancy I have lost,"
repeated Dame Grumble scornfully.
"The fortune I fancy I have lost. I do not fancy I have lost a fortune. I know full well I have lost a fortune. Besides, who would give a copper farthing for your clumsy chests and boxes?"
So all day long Dame Grumble dwelt on her woes. At night she sat sighing in the chimney corner until the little cottage, quite close to the top of the earth, was as dull and gloomy as though 1,000 crows had settled suddenly upon it. Now it happened at this time, when all Dame Grumble's troubles seemed too many to be borne, that the good dame and her son enjoyed a visitor. Visitors in that country quite close to the top of the earth were very rare, you may be sure. This visitor was not an ordinary sort of person. Far from that was he, indeed, because he journeyed ceaselessly about the earth and was well known to folk of many lands. He was called the Traveller. But though he roamed thus everywhere, the traveller seemed never bound for any certain land or country, but went his ways just as the winds of heaven went theirs. The traveller never remained long in any city or village. Nevertheless, he stayed long enough to do a kindness for some sad one, or to help some poor one on his way. Few people ever could agree about his age. The old thought him young, and the young thought him old. However, young and old alike agreed that the traveller seemed possessed of magic powers to banish cares and troubles. Wherever he found quarrels and spites, he left love and kindliness. Where he found envy, he left content. Where he went once, the traveller always found a warm welcome awaiting him on his return. What was the secret source of the traveller's noble qualities was a mystery to all folk. Some said the traveller kept his cheerful spirit because of a certain great cloak that he always wore. This cloak, they said, was made of wool woven from the fleece of fairy sheep, and had great powers of happiness. Others said that in a far-off country the traveller had drunk deeply of a certain magic well, the waters of which were said to bless one with a kindly heart for evermore. Still others thought the traveller's power over cares and sorrow lay in the plain wood staff that he always carried. But though the secret of his soothing charm was thus uncertain, certain it was that the traveller paid a visit to Dame Grumble and her son one chill autumn evening, and the story of it all is this. It happened one day, as the traveller was walking along the road that led up to the country quite close to the top of the earth, he chanced to meet the North Wind. Now the North Wind loved to tease and play his tricks on everyone, and so he seized the traveller's hat and blew it 5 fields off. He swept stinging dust into his eyes, and wrapped his cloak so tightly around him that but for his staff the traveller would have stumbled. Though he was so bothered and annoyed, the traveller did not complain. He loosed his cloak and wiped his eyes of the dust. Then once again he set upon his way.
"Ah," said the traveller, "it is a strong wind that blows here, but how clean the road is swept in consequence. It is also a good wind."
The North Wind had expected blame instead of praise, and was abashed. So straightway he brought back the hat, and then he blew gently in the direction which would best suit the traveller's footsteps. So it was that this visitor knocked at Dame Grumble's cottage one evening, just at candlelight. The traveller begged her hospitality, and Dame Grumble bade him enter. She placed a chair before the hearth, and began to prepare a supper for him. All the while she complained most bitterly that she should thus receive a guest in her kitchen. When she set forth the supper, Dame Grumble sighed because the bread was brown instead of white.
"Never sigh, Dame Grumble," urged the traveller with his kindly smile. "Seldom have I seen a pleasanter kitchen, and never have I eaten better fare. Your brown bread is fit for a king, and your broth would give courage to a weary army."
"That is all very well for you to say, good sir,"
replied Dame Grumble sulkily,
"but you do not know all my troubles."
She did not often find one to give ear to her tale of sorrow, and if the traveller would, Dame Grumble meant that he should hear her. Above all else in the world, Dame Grumble loved to talk about her woes.
"Then perhaps after supper, when you sit before the fire, you will tell me of your troubles, good dame,"
said the traveller. You may be sure Dame Grumble agreed. Indeed, so eager was she to begin that she hummed a lively tune to hasten her work. At the unusual sound of his mother's singing, Freyo left his bench to learn the cause of it. When he saw the traveller, he greeted him with warmth.
"We do not often have a visitor, good sir,"
said he.
"so I shall leave my work and join you by the fireside." "But first," exclaimed the traveller, "you must let me see this work of yours. You must dearly love it, thus to be about it after darkness has fallen and all men sit to take their ease." "Good sir," replied Freyo, "my work is wood carving, and I do love it better than the whole world."
The traveller regarded the great chests and clock cases with deep admiration, and begged Freyo to tell him of his work, of whom he had learned his skill, and whence his designs had come. To these questions Freyo replied that he did not know. He supposed he had taught himself.
"Good sir," said he, "some folk make pictures on a canvas with bright-coloured oils and brilliant paints, and other folk make pictures with fair words, as they tell wonder tales. I have not skill like those, but I have dreamed bright dreams, and have loved to sit and carve my dreams upon my chests of oak and walnut wood. Think you that my skill is fair, or that my pictures would please aught beside myself, who carved them?"
"I have no words to tell you how high I hold your skill," declared the traveller. "And as for the pictures you have carved in wood, they would delight a queen, or please a king as well. They are truly lovely."
"Then, good sir," replied Freyo, "to the apple tree that stands before our door you must give all this praise. The summer before the summer that has just passed, this good tree, of her own accord, did give me her 2 stoutest branches, from which I made a pair of crutches. Then I could wander in the woods from dawn till dark, and hear the birds sing songs the whole day long. 'Twas then I learned to dream my finest dreams. It was like heaven, sir."
The poor lad sighed in memory of the happy time, and before he could say more, Dame Grumble interrupted. The good dame could no longer restrain her tongue or her impatience, it seemed.
"Now, good sir,"
cried she,
"you have heard my son, you must hear me. The apple tree was not an ordinary tree, as my son knew very well. He did wrong to cut the smallest twig whilst I was gone. Each year, when the cuckoo came calling in the spring, there was no finer sight in all the world than the apple tree. So thick was it with blossoms that scarce a branch or twig could be seen. Its fragrance floated on the breeze, drawing every bee and butterfly for leagues and leagues about. Surely with such a tree I might look for a bounteous harvest, one would think. But alas, no sooner was the apple tree thus decked like a bride than my wicked enemy, the North Wind, would come and blow these blossoms far away. But mark you now the wonder of my tale. A few blossoms would sometimes fall beneath the tree, and when they fell they made a chinking sound like that of small coins in children's banks. When they had withered, I always found bright new shining pennies where they had lain. Now, from this curious fact, I have believed that when the apple tree would bear fruit, the apples would be of gold. If young and tender blossoms yield bright new shining pennies, does it not follow that the ripened fruit should be of purest gold?"
"It would seem so, good dame," agreed the traveller. "What then were the apples? Silver, perhaps?"
"Indeed, sir, no,"
replied Dame Grumble with deep feeling.
"For all I know, in cutting off the branches of my favourite tree, my wicked son bewitched it. For though the apple tree bore fruit this year, it bore naught but red apples of a common sort. I scorn to gather them." "Oh, oh!"
wept Dame Grumble, bursting into tears once again at the memory of her loss.
"Thus to have my own son so wicked and disobedient, whilst I, footsore and weary, was seeking for the fortune in pennies which the North Wind had stolen from me these many years. It is too much. I am sure, good sir, you will agree that I have many troubles, and that it is not right to call me Dame Grumble because I sometimes speak of them."
"I had rather agree that you have also many blessings, good dame," returned the traveller, with his kindly smile. "Come, let us draw our chairs before the hearth, and perhaps you may learn to see them too. There is nothing that does so help us see our blessings as the bright flames dancing up the chimney, when all the world without is dark and cold." But ere she sat down, Dame Grumble recollected yet another grievance.
"And added to my other troubles,"
she complained,
"I have a son who is lame, and must be always a burden instead of a staff."
The traveller nodded gravely. "That is a sorrow, I agree," said he, "and I have no doubt, good dame, that your motherly heart must often ache with the pity of it all." To this Dame Grumble made no reply. She began to think instead. For years her mind had been so busy with the plans for her blossoms and her golden harvest that it had quite forgotten how to think of aught else. As for her heart, it ached only when she thought of the fortune in pennies that the North Wind had stolen from her, and that she had not found. "Then, too, Dame Grumble," continued the traveller, "I must tell you that I think the North Wind no more than a rough, playful fellow, and not wicked, as you say. Only this afternoon he stole my hat and ran away with it. But before I had gone 20 yards, the amiable fellow had brought it back to me again. And since he blew me to your cottage door, I will henceforth claim the North Wind for my friend."
"Then since it was the North Wind that brought you to our door, I will no longer call him my enemy, but instead will call him my friend also,"
declared Dame Grumble with a smile. In the firelight her face suddenly looked so sweet and gentle that Freyo sighed deeply. Dame Grumble heard the sigh and asked her son the cause of it.
"I sighed because I wished you would smile often, mother," replied the lad. "You looked so sweet and pleasant."
"And now," began the traveller, "since we are all so happy, let us begin to think about the good dame's difficulties. The fortune in pennies which she sought and could not find, the precious blossoms which the North Wind blows away each spring, and the apple tree which should have borne apples of gold, but which bore red apples instead. For these 3 evils we must find a remedy without delay." Now all the while she had been sitting with the traveller by the fireside, because of his magic power, Dame Grumble had been thinking busily, not of fortunes or of golden apples, or yet of red apples either. Instead, quite to her own surprise, she was thinking of how wearied she had grown of all these things. She wished suddenly that she would never hear of them again. Judge, then, of her son's astonishment when she answered the traveller in the following fashion.
"Good sir, although I sat me down to talk about my troubles, now that I have told them, they seem light and trifling. I am indeed amazed that I have heeded them at all. Though for years and years I have quarrelled with the North Wind because he robbed me of a fortune, I seem suddenly to care no longer for fortunes or gold or riches or any such. For as I peer into the flames, it comes to my mind that there are many in this world not so blessed as I. Many a one is hungry and has naught to eat, while my larder is filled. Some are cold, whilst I sit in comfort before a fire of pine knots that sputter and glow. I see now that I have many blessings."
Dame Grumble did not know she had these thoughts because of the traveller. "Ah!" cried the traveller, "did I not say the blazing logs helped one to see one's blessings? And was I not right?"
"I have often fancied that was so, good sir," agreed Freyo. "And now, since my mother no longer wishes to talk about her troubles, perhaps you will tell us tales of your journeys. You are a traveller and have seen far distant lands."
"Pray do, good sir,"
begged Dame Grumble too.
"It is long since my son and I have heard tales of any sort. Also, from your great wisdom, I have a notion that we shall be highly entertained."
So the traveller told them tales of other lands. He told of strange birds with bright-hued feathers of such great length that they swept upon the ground like queens' trains. He told of burning mountains and of fiery lakes, of lovely flowers blooming in the snow, and gardens that grew underneath the sea. The wind without howled dismally. Within, the flames leaped high and made queer elfin shadows to dance on the walls. The clock ticked off the minutes into hours, but still Dame Grumble and her son sat listening, wrapped in wonder. At last the candles snuffed out, and naught but the back log smouldered and glowed in the darkness.
"Now, good sir,"
cried Dame Grumble,
"I'm sure that you must be weary."
She bade him take the best room, but the traveller refused. The comfortable chair in which he sat was all he needed, he declared, and he bade the good dame and her son good night. When they awakened next morning, he had gone, but on the chair they found his staff. Fastened to the staff there was a note which bade Freyo use it in place of the crutches, and said that when he had no longer need for it, to give it to some other one that had.
"Mother,"
said Freyo, when he had read the note over and over again,
"would this not seem to say that I might one day walk without the aid of either crutch or staff? What think you of it?"
"It would seem so, my son," replied the dame, "and then how happy I would be."
A knock at the door startled them both. Dame Grumble, thinking it was the traveller returned, hastened to open, but it was not he. It was a king's herald, dressed in scarlet satin and silver laces. "I am the herald of King Silversword," said he. He bowed low to Dame Grumble, as though she were a duchess.
"And I am Dame Grumble, at his Majesty's service,"
answered Dame Grumble, with a bow equally fine. "Then hearken to my message," began the herald. He unrolled a scroll of parchment, set thick with king's seals, and written all in silver letters, and read the following proclamation. "Know ye that the apple crop of the whole world has failed. From north to south, from east to west, there is not one apple to be found, nay, not for a king's ransom. Now that of itself could be borne none the less, for apples be great luxuries. However, the little Princess Silverstar, the only daughter of King Silversword and Queen Silverland, has fallen ill and craves constantly for red apples. The doctors and the medical men hold no hope for her recovery unless she has to eat the fruit she craves. Wherefore, if good Dame Grumble will sell a dozen or more red apples to his Majesty King Silversword, she may name any sum of gold or portions of rich jewels in payment. Nay, whether she demand both gold and jewels, or even his Majesty's entire fortune, it shall be hers in exchange for her red apples. Come now, good dame, what do you say?" asked the herald, as he rolled up the scroll once more.
"I say, good Master Herald, that my red apples are not for sale," the dame replied. "But if they have a power to restore the little Princess Silverstar, she may have them all. They shall be a gift from me and my son Freyo."
Now the herald was amazed at this. From the humble surroundings, he knew the good dame and her son were naught but worthy peasants, and he reasoned wisely that riches would not be amiss. Accordingly, he tried to persuade Dame Grumble to accept some gift, a tract of fertile land, a noble mansion, or at least a bag or two of gold. But Dame Grumble was firm in her intention, and would not be persuaded.
"If my red apples have a power to heal," she declared, "they will have thrice that power if given with a good heart, instead of in barter or exchange."
So the herald besought her no more. He called the servants and bade them strip the tree, and then, with many thanks, he hastened on his way.
"Oh, mother," cried
Freyo, as they watched the royal coach depart,
"how fine of you to refuse such riches! All your life you have so longed for a fortune, too." "Indeed, my son,"
replied the good dame earnestly,
"the only fortune I desire now is the fortune that you will one day make for me. However, I must confess that all the while I spoke with the king's herald, it seemed that the traveller was close beside to tell me what to say, and that the words were not my own. Now, was that not a strange thing? And he gone these many hours?"
As she went about her daily tasks, the good dame seemed to have forgotten her old woes and troubles, and Freyo whistled like a thrush as he sat working at his bench. The little cottage had never known such a happy day. Freyo's tools seemed to fly as though by magic, and the gloom that had been slowly settling down upon the little cottage quite close to the top of the earth now seemed to take wings and fly off. It was just at sunset when they heard the blowing of horns and trumpets, and again the coach of King Silversword drew up before their door. Freyo, wishing to hear news of the Princess Silverstar, seized the traveller's staff and hobbled toward the door. But wonder of wonders! No sooner had he leaned his weight upon it than he grew tall and straight as a young poplar tree. Like an arrow he sped from the cottage door, and Dame Grumble rubbed her eyes, lest she should wake and find herself a-dreaming.
"Now look you, good Master Herald," she cried in amazement. "You saw my son only this morning, and he was lame as lame could be. And now, behold, he walks as well as you or I. Truly, say I, it is a day of miracles."
"Thou sayest right, good dame," declared the herald. "It is to tell you of another miracle that I have come hither. Only this morn the little Princess Silverstar did eat but one of the red apples, and to the delight and wonder of the court, she began to grow stronger. When she had eaten 3 or 4, the doctors and medical men pronounced her cured. They believed that the red apples, coming as a gift, rather than for barter or exchange, had worked an important part in this miraculous recovery. Tonight there is a great feasting and rejoicing in the land of King Silversword, and the praises of Dame Grumble and her son are sung by rich and poor and high and low alike." The herald then unrolled another scroll and read the following proclamation. "Wherefore His Majesty King Silversword, to show his gratitude, doth now create Freyo, the first wood carver of his kingdom, and master of all other wood carvers in the land." Freyo could scarcely believe his good fortune, and begged the herald to read the scroll once more. Then he began to shout with joy. "And only to think, mother," he cried, "I am no longer lame, but can walk about, like all the youths whom I shall meet at court." "I am rejoiced," declared Dame Grumble. "But if there be feasting in all the lands of King Silversword, there should likewise be feasting in our little cottage. You are whole and strong, and the Princess Silverstar is restored to health through our gift. Let us be merry too. And you, good Master Herald," continued the good dame, "though our food be plain, if happy hearts alone be needed, there will be no merrier household in all the world than ours tonight. Will you not sup with us?" The herald vowed he would be honoured, and so Dame Grumble popped another pudding in the steaming pot, and they all sat down. While the 3 ate and drank, the good dame and her son recalled the wonder of their visitor the evening before. "One could scarce believe the change the traveller wrought upon my mind and heart," said the good dame. "Before he came I was scolding and complaining always, from morning until night. Yet since he entered into my door, I have had scarce a vexatious thought." "It would seem, good dame, that the traveller was some gentle spirit come from afar," agreed the herald. "I do not doubt that he and his magic arts are the secret cause of these miracles we have seen today." When he departed with the herald the next day, Freyo left behind the traveller's staff. The good dame fancied it would be a guard against the return of her low spirits. She leaned on it as she stood by the cottage door and waved her son a farewell, and thought with pride how handsome he was now that he was tall and straight. Thus we must leave Dame Grumble in the country quite close to the top of the earth, and journey off with Freyo on the way to seek his fortune. At the court of King Silversword, Freyo was welcomed with much honour and ceremony. Dame Grumble's gift to the little princess had made 1,000 good friends for him, it seemed. King Silversword looked at him with eyes of gratitude. Queen Silverland could not praise him enough. The little Princess Silverstar took much pleasure in the tales that Freyo told her of the North Wind and the apple tree. Before many days had passed, Freyo had become the child's favourite courtier, and was a favourite of the whole court likewise. The noble lords vowed that Freyo had wisdom beyond his years, and vied with one another to do him kindnesses. The noble ladies declared that Freyo had a kindly heart as well as handsome features. They said his gentle manners were worthy of a duke's son. King Silversword gave orders that a fine workroom be built at the top of the royal palace, and fitted with every sort of tool that a wood-carver might fancy. He also sent great ships a-sailing off to distant lands to bring rare woods for Freyo's work. When all things were in order, Freyo began his first task for the great King Silversword. It was to carve 7 great chests, which would be used as dower chests for the little princess by and by. So fine was the design upon each chest, and so delicate and intricate the carving and the traceries, that 7 long years passed before the 7 chests were finished. In all that time, although the princess grew to be a lovely maiden, tall and stately, she still took pleasure in the tales that Freyo told her of the apple tree that grew up in the country quite close to the top of the earth. Now, when these 7 chests were shown at court, it was the opinion of wise men and artists from far and near that their equal could not be found in all the world. King Silversword was greatly pleased, and in reward he commanded that Freyo be made Duke of Freyoland. 10,000 leagues of land in the country quite close to the top of the earth were given him for his domain, and a noble castle was likewise built there for him. The 7 dower chests were next filled full of gold and jewels, and orders for a splendid ball were given. Princes and dukes, as well as lords and marquises from every court on earth, were bidden to attend, and from this assemblage of noble youths the Princess Silverstar would choose her husband. Some gossips at the court declared it was assured that Princess Silverstar would choose Prince Goldenmines, the richest prince in all the world. Others thought that she would surely favor Prince Palmire, because he was so handsome. Judge, then, of the surprise of all when Princess Silverstar chose Freyo for her prince and begged her royal parents to consent.
"Is it not to Freyo's noble gift so long ago that we do owe our daughter's life?" exclaimed these grateful monarchs. "How then shall we deny him for our daughter's husband? Announce the betrothal heralds." Then straightway the wedding day was set. Dame Grumble journeyed down from the country quite close to the top of the earth, and was made welcome by Queen Silverland and her noble ladies. To be quite formal, we should now call the good dame Duchess Freyoland, for as mother of a duke she had likewise become ennobled. However, as the good dame liked her old name best, perhaps we had best call her just Dame Grumble after all. In order that all folk might rejoice in goodly earnest at her wedding feast, the Princess Silverstar besought her father 2 favors. First, that he would forgive all debts and moneys that his people owed the crown, and second, that he would take no taxes for a whole year and a day. She then commanded that every subject be given fine new holiday attire and a well-filled purse, according to his rank and station. In all the history of the kingdom there was not known a finer feast than this. The noble lords and ladies rode and drove or danced at splendid balls. The common people sang or played games on the highways and feasted on the village greens. Then, when the 7 days of fun and feasting passed at last, and Freyo with his lovely bride drove off to their castle, Dame Grumble sat beside them in the royal chariot. But not for long could the good dame content herself in their splendid castle. Her heart began to yearn, and she began to pine most sadly for her home, though Freyo and his lovely bride begged her to stay and dwell with them forever. The good dame would not hear of it.
"Ah, no, my children," cried Dame Grumble. "Long, long ago, 'tis true, I wished for a noble house, and fancied I would be happy as a queen if I might live in one. Since the visit of the traveller, I have grown much wiser. I know that I can be happy as a queen if I am but content. So in my little cottage with the north wind and the apple tree for friends, I shall dwell all my days."
So saying, Dame Grumble bade Freyo and his lovely bride farewell, and leaning on the traveller's staff, she set off for home. She reached her little cottage on a bright spring day, just when the apple tree was decked in clouds of fragrant pinky white blossoms, and looked as lovely as a fairy tree. Dame Grumble gazed with satisfaction on her favorite tree, and as she gazed, it came to her mind that in all the noble sights she saw at court, she had seen nothing half so lovely as the apple tree in spring. It was not long now before the north wind came roaring over field and forest in his usual fashion. But when he saw Dame Grumble, he ceased suddenly. He asked most civilly how the good dame did, and whether she had liked the life at court. To all his questions Dame Grumble made most amiable reply, and hoped the North Wind's health was fair. For, if you will believe me, these two old enemies were now good friends. They had not had a cross word or a quarrel since the evening of the traveller's visit long ago.
"And now, Dame Grumble," said the North Wind, "for 7 long years you have ceased your scolding and grumbling, and if you will it so, the spell that bound the apple tree may now be broken. Only command me to cease my mischief, and I will touch your blossoms nevermore. Likewise, command the apple tree to bear you golden apples, and you shall have them."
"But, North Wind," cried the apple tree, "first tell my mistress what you have done with all the pennies from my blossoms. My mistress has a heart of gold, and needs not golden apples."
Dame Grumble smiled with pleasure that the apple tree should speak thus kindly of her. Well she remembered the olden days when she had often been most harsh with her favourite tree, and she hoped the tree had now forgiven her.
"The apple tree praises my heart too highly," said Dame Grumble modestly. "Still, North Wind, I must own that I have been most curious about the pennies from the blossoms you have blown away."
"The pennies were not stored in some hollow of the earth as you supposed, long, long ago when you set out to find them," said the North Wind. "Each springtime, when I blew the blossoms of the apple tree around the world, I dropped the pennies at the feet of poor children who had none but me to love them. These poor children then ran pell-mell to the nearest sweet shop to spend their pennies, and were happy as larks in consequence."
"The apple tree is right,"
declared Dame Grumble.
"For all the golden apples in the world, I would not rob a single poor child of its penny. So blow your fiercest, North Wind, and apple tree, see to it that there be a penny for every orphan child on earth."
The North Wind obeyed, and Dame Grumble smiled to see the lovely blossoms flying through the air like April's snow. And so the good dame settled down to dwell in peace and happiness. Kings' palaces and dukes' castles were all very well, said she, but after all there was no place like home. As for climate and a clear blue sky in summer, there was no place to equal the country quite close to the top of the earth, Dame Grumble thought. Often and often, just at candlelight, Dame Grumble peered into the dusk and gloom in hopes of seeing the traveller coming toward her door. But he came not. Sometimes she asked the North Wind for news of him, but he could tell her little.
"I think," said the North Wind, "that the traveller still journeys round the earth, but always in advance of me. Sometimes I travel over cities where all folk are content, and where there are no strifes nor quarrels. I hear folk speaking of a noble traveller who has lingered with them, and I have often thought it is the traveller whom we seek. If I should ever meet him, I shall tell him that Dame Grumble waits each evening to welcome him."
"But my mistress, and you too, North Wind," said the apple tree. "Have you not heard it said the traveller visits only those who are sad and sorrowful, or who are afflicted with cold, selfish hearts? If that be true, he will return to our little cottage no more. There is no need for him."
Now it would seem that the apple tree was right, for the traveller returned no more, and in all the world there was not such another place for comfort and good cheer as Dame Grumble's little cottage quite close to the top of the earth, where the North Wind blew fiercely each spring.